Hey guys, Warman here. It's time once again to go over the latest news and updates regarding Medieval 3. Sorry for being late to the party about this, but I've been painfully busy lately. Though I did manage to catch the recent livestream, there's a ton to talk about this time. I can only imagine how long this video is gonna end up being. Let's not waste any more time and just get into this. Firstly, we got a recap post that summarizes everything from December to January. It condenses a lot of the information and releases it as a blog. Now, if you recall, I made a suggestion for doing this exact thing in a previous video, but I can confirm that it was a coincidence. They were always planning on doing this. I guess they just wanted to do it quarterly and not monthly. Given how there's some delay over what gets approved for this post apparently, I can see why they would want the extra time. Now, you might still be wondering, Warman, if they're gonna recap things anyway, are you still going to be making recap videos? Of course! Besides the aforementioned lag between updates, I'm not making these videos just to recap the latest news. I'm also using this opportunity to discuss and analyze what's being said, and bring up suggestions and questions too. As the creators of this mod, we can bring a perspective to this discussion like no one else can. There's another section on this recap post as well about modding tools, but we're gonna get to that later. Before I go any further, I just want to briefly apologize to Leif of the Med3 team for mispronouncing his name. I was pronouncing it as Leif, but no, it's Leif. I probably could have realized that mistake sooner had I paid more attention to the earlier live stream in December, but hey, better late than never. Now, there's probably going to be some instances in this video where I still mispronounce it as Leif, because some of the recording for this video is from weeks ago before the live stream, and I'm trying to minimize how much I re-record here. Speaking of Leif, I am pleased to report that he has answered our questions from the previous video, as well as a couple questions I asked in the wake of the more recent developments. It helps that I post these videos as well as my questions on the forum directly. Major kudos to Leif for continuing this conversation and dialogue. Seriously, we're going free for free now. It's very good to see this kind of open discussion. Even if they don't respond directly to every post, they do query read every post. By the way, people consistently asking questions is how we got information about stuff like the regional retinues. So please, if you guys have burning questions, go to the forum. I can vouch for the fact that they do answer stuff there. They even have a panel here that's strictly for dev posts, and this is how I keep track of a lot of what they're saying. Now, I'm not going to go over every answer today, but we can still talk about most of these. So, the first question I asked was, can you play the game past the end year, and if you want to map paint, will you still be able to? Regarding the first question, the answer is yes, which is pretty much what I thought. You can play the game past the end year, but new content stops after that. Apparently Leif had answered this question already, but I guess I missed it. So, sorry about that. I'm trying to not ask questions that have already been asked, because if Leif or someone else has answered the question already, I'd rather just get that answer. I don't like asking redundant questions, but hey, no one's perfect. And as for the map painting, they said it's still going to be possible, but basically it's going to be harder than in previous games. That's mostly fair. I think it's just going to depend on how difficult we're talking and what the hurdles end up being. But even more than usual, it's way too early to guess stuff like that at this time. By the way, here's a fun game to play. Count how many times I say that in these videos. As for my second question, how extensive is the technological osmosis going to be? Essentially, the technological osmosis is going to be split between key innovations and applications. Key innovations are described as crucial ideas that can move across the map through osmosis or when be confronted with in battle. And applications is learning how to use an innovation, and this will be more akin to research in previous titles. So key innovations are essentially a precursor to research. Again, there's a good example here he gives regarding the spinning wheel thing. I'm gonna have this on screen, so feel free to pause and read it. So yeah, this is pretty solid. It really doesn't sound that much more complex than previous titles, but it's a subtle change that feels right. Now, of course, this could just mean extra steps that end up making the whole process frustrating, but we just have to wait and see how it's executed. Can a charge either stall or not follow through if it's against an extremely cohesive unit? Yes, that's the idea. Something like loose formation would naturally make you more susceptible to charges, whereas a brace action would do the opposite. So yeah, apparently that's the plan. Again, there really isn't too much to say at the moment. We just gotta see if the Med3 team can pull it off. What source are you using for the medieval material culture of the period? And yeah, I should have said sources, not source, because as Leif rightfully points out, It's not just a single source, and it depends heavily on the area, era, or topic. And we got some very useful information regarding the sources that they are using for the Holy Roman Empire roster, and you can see them on screen. Now, just like before, I haven't read these books, but some of the other mod team members have, and yeah, these are actually really good sources. And many of these can be used for stuff beyond the Holy Roman Empire. In fact, these are very solid sources for pretty much all of Europe in the 1300s, at least, even as far as like Eastern Europe. I can only imagine how many other sources they have for some of the other areas. Also, Leif name drops manuscript miniatures, and that's a big deal, because that is literally one of the same sources we've used for this mod. And I feel pretty vindicated here actually, because I said in a previous video, I think it was the one about the concept art, that Creative Assembly needs to avoid Osprey and stick to more primary sources. And I featured a lot of manuscript art in that, but you notice I didn't say where I found it. I also mentioned in that video that while we could give Creative Assembly our sources, I said that they probably didn't need us to do that since they could find the stuff on their own. And, as you can see, at least partially, I was right. I know our sources aren't perfect either, and regarding Iberia, I haven't forgotten the concerns that the one historian in our comment section levied, but I think we can still all agree that these sources here are still 1,000 times better than something like Osprey. It's still a major step in the right direction. Of course, we're not out of the woods yet. We still need to see how this manifests in the units themselves, and I'm very curious to see how it's going to end up. I do want to say for the record that while I'm not above pointing out the inaccuracies in these units, I made my peace with this a long time ago. As long as the inaccuracies aren't too egregious and we get proper modding tools, which spoiler alert we are, I'll be fine. Because historical inaccuracies can be fixed by modders. Broken or badly designed systems, animations, mechanics, those are the more important things that Medieval 3 needs to get right, and those are the things that are going to be significantly harder for us to mod. Now there's 3 separate questions where technically Leif did answer them, but I'm going to hold off on discussing them until we get more information. These questions all pertain to certain things regarding units and rosters, and Leif plans on making a thread about this in the near future. I don't know when, since there's a whole round of consultation apparently going on, but presumably in the next few weeks and months, so we'll discuss this further then. Now, before we get to the live stream, I want to go over some other posts and developments that have not been covered in the recap thread, especially since now these posts are going to be overshadowed by the live stream, because there's been some major info drops on factions that are absolutely worth talking about. Because I've been low-key agonizing trying to figure out how factions were going to even work in this game. I think I mentioned that before. Given the nature of the feudal system, as well as the notable rise of new factions and players and groups later on, like the Mongols, the Ottomans, the Mamluks, the Timurids. Not only are we talking about 3 centuries here, these are centuries that are very dynamic, with a lot of things going on, so that raises a lot of questions. Seriously, I'm not at all surprised that one of the biggest themes of Medieval 3 is change. It's a very appropriate motif and a good design choice to focus on. Getting back to factions, slowly but surely most of my questions have been answered over the past couple months, and while sometimes they lead to more questions, I still have a better idea where the headspace is for factions now in this game, at least in some areas of the map. Instead of going over the blow-by-blow, I am just going to summarize everything all together. This summary is born from several posts Leif made answering stuff about the Holy Roman Empire, as well as a post about France, the response to question 8, and some other statements Leif has made since the very beginning. Brace yourselves everyone, because this is going to get interesting. So factions in general can be malleable if you play your cards right, both politically and culturally. There is a sense of progression with many factions in many areas where they start out as like feudal kind of realms and end up as nation states, although the mileage varies on that. They want realms to have multiple dynasties, and dynasties can emerge per consequences like Man of the Hour. Which is funny because there was a comment on the last recap video that was talking about this. So yeah, I hope you feel vindicated because they address what you said here. And this is probably how they are going to address emergence, you know, like the Ottomans, the Mamluks, etc. Now, as for the potential playable faction lineup, not even Creative Assembly knows yet. Apparently that's something they don't figure out until later on. And this time around they might get the community involved. But there is a more recent point that Leif has brought up that has me greatly intrigued, and that is the expansion of vassals in this game. Leif has revealed that they have expanded the concept of vassals into 2 kinds, internal vassals and external vassals. External vassals are the traditional Total War vassal. They are a separate faction with its own turn, but they're subservient to you. An internal vassal is something different. Apparently it's going to be similar to a super governor in previous titles. They could have multiple regions. Their autonomy varies depending on the realm here. There can be political and military conflicts between them. Their economy is inherently linked to their parent faction, and they don't have their own turn. They will also have your faction color on the map, although I think that's going to be a little bit more contextual. I'm hoping anyway that these internal vassals are still going to have their emblems, but I think it's just for simplicity's sake the coloring on the map is still going to be like the faction color. A couple examples Leif gave for the Holy Roman Empire is Colonia and Saxony, with the former in particular getting some elaboration, saying that it would be a small but powerful internal vassal of the Holy Roman Empire. I mean, first of all, I like the idea that internal vassals can be powerful even if they're small. Having this amount of regions not directly tied to power sounds like a smart decision. It has also been made clear that internal vassals can become external vassals and vice versa. Oh, and by the way, internal vassals are not the same as crown lands. So basically there's 3 different types of territory now. Okay, where to begin with this, because this is a lot to process when you actually stop and think about it. And once more, this is a pretty big development that no one is talking about. But hey, that's why I'm here, right? Now, before I go into this, understand that this is just what I think this system is gonna mean. I honestly don't know if I got this right. So Leif, since I know you're watching this, let me know if I got anything wrong here, because the last thing I want is to spread unintentional misinformation. Just in general, the system feels like a great way to have a bunch of factions basically be playable in a way that otherwise might be taxing to deal with. They have no obligation to do this, but it would be cool one day if we can find out what specifically Leif and the Medfleet team took away from our mod, if anything at all. Perhaps we could have this discussion later on when things are much further along and finalized. Again, that's assuming they took anything away from us in the first place. I am aware they did check out the mod at some point, but I think the question is less what inspiration did they take from our mod and more how would they improve and iterate on something we did. Maybe I'm looking way too much into this, but when I see a system like this, I see someone that looked at our mod and saw the merits of how we did things with a lot of the factions, but also rightfully realized how difficult it would be to do that for an actual game. Even if the rosters are comparatively similar to each other, that is way too much work. They have to keep on a schedule and make sure all the assets they are making for this stuff are professional and all that jazz. And besides, they're on a new engine, they can simply work from the ground up and take aspects they liked from what we did and improve upon it in a deeper way. It's obvious they looked at Medieval 2. I suspect they might have looked at Age of Charlemagne, but Age of Charlemagne probably isn't as helpful as our mod because it's hundreds of years earlier. Our mod is literally in the time frame of the game, Age of Charlemagne isn't. And what I'm talking about goes double for the Holy Roman Empire here. Now, we don't know what other systems the Holy Roman Empire has yet, but we do know it's going to be one faction, not counting external vassals like the Italian city-states, because yes, Leif has clarified that the Italian city-states are probably going to be externals. They do have a rough guideline, by the way, for how they determine whether or not a faction is going to be an internal vassal or an external vassals, with kingdoms typically being external and duchies and counties and the like typically being internal. But that's not a hard rule, because France is already breaking it. But as for the German parts of the empire, the Holy Roman Empire in this game is basically going to be a mix of Medieval 2 style and ours. Just like with the time frame of this game, I swear Creative Assembly has basically combined Medieval 2's approach with ours to have something that's better than the sum of its parts. And I'm saying that because Medieval 2's Holy Roman Empire was just a single faction. In our mod, the Holy Roman Empire is basically a bunch of scattered notable German duchies, with one of the duchies being the current emperor, versus Medieval 3, where the Holy Roman Empire is a single faction with a bunch of notable German duchies and the like as internal vassals. So basically you are simultaneously a single faction while still having all these duchies relevant to what's going on. So yeah, I think they combined the two approaches. That's what it looks like to me. And as Leif himself kind of pointed out, it's also way more historically accurate. What I think is the most interesting side effect of this system though is you are, for all intents and purposes, playing as all the duchies. Not just a couple scattered ones like we had in our mod. You're going to be playing as all of them. Yes, all of them. So, Saxony, Colonia, Bavaria, Austria, Lorraine, Brabant, all of them. At the same time, the only limitations being external vassals, as well as how detailed Creative Assembly is gonna make this map. Yeah, this is actually huge, and totally redefines how a lot of factions are even gonna work in this game and what we should expect from certain areas. Now, the other region we have details on in this regard is France. Leif has said in another post that France may have more external vassals and will be trying to centralize decentralized, increasing the lands directly held by the crown and turning externals internal. This is also why I was emphasizing that this reference point was a guideline and not a rule, because Anjou, Normandy, Brittany, and Toulouse are counties and duchies. They are not kingdoms, but they have enough autonomy to justifiably be external vassals. So the mileage is going to vary depending on the realm. And this makes perfect sense since literally the driving force of the Capettes in this period was they wanted to gain more control over France, since their supposed kingdom was heavily divided and decentralized and no one listened to them. I did some research of my own regarding this, by the way, and I caught something very interesting. Did you know that in 1140, King Louis VII was married to Eleanor of Aquitaine, as in the same Eleanor that would later get that marriage annulled and would go on to marry into the Plantagenets. This was the woman who was crucial for causing the creation of the Afghan Empire, which would go on to be a defining aspect of the later wars between England and France. Yeah, it's that same Eleanor, but right now she's married to the King of France, which means that all those lands belong to the French right now and not the English. So Creative Assembly is starting this game in the very brief period where the playing field is a little bit more even and a lot of the big civil wars haven't happened yet, so there is major potential for diverting paths. I did a mock-up illustration of what I think France is going to look like here. I took a map that was originally set for 1154 and altered it so it fit 1140 instead. So if I understand this right, you're going to have Toulouse, Anjou, Normandy, and Brittany being external vassals. And I think Burgundy, Aquitaine, Gascony, and Flanders being internal vassals. There's other duchies here, but again, I don't know how detailed the map is going to be, so I don't know if they're going to fit on it. But yes, I think you're basically going to be playing as France, Burgundy, and Flanders at the same time. At least possibly. This internal vassal system, by the way, explains an oddity I didn't mention in the livestream a few months ago. Because if you watch it, you can see the coloring of 3 Spanish factions: Castile, Aragon, and Leon. But there was a slight problem here. Leon should have been part of Castile at this time, because technically right now it was the unified kingdom of Castile and Leon. And while Leon would break away again for a time, that was later on, not during this year. So why is it here with its own color separately? I thought it might have just been an inaccuracy, but my intuition was telling me to wait, and I'm glad I did. I think this is just merely reflecting that Leon is going to be an internal vassal of Castile. Now the only wrinkle in this theory is Leon is colored as itself and not the same as Castile. You guys probably have a lot of questions, and so do I. One question I know a lot of you are probably asking is how is this going to affect rosters? And this is another reason why I want to wait for that roster thread before giving too many thoughts here. We can still talk about some stuff though. You guys are probably wondering if there's going to be regional variants of these units. Well, we can already answer that. If you saw my previous recap video or just read the recap post, we know that there's going to be a regional retinue system, and the units will carry the heraldry of their region. But region does not necessarily equal duchy or county. Between that and the passing mention of how internal vassals are going to be colored, and I felt like we still needed more information. So this was one of 2 questions I posted in the coverage thread when I decided to delay the video, and Leif once more answered them. When it comes to how these units are going to be colored, there's going to be 2 layers. One is for the faction colors, the other is a secondary layer that will belong to either an internal vassal, or if this is part of a crown land, the region. And if an internal vassal has multiple regions, they are all going to have the heraldry of that vassal. The example Leif gives is the Welf Duke of Saxony, how their retinues would be yellow-black as the primary color of the Holy Roman Empire, and blue and yellow elements as the secondary element representing the Welfs. Oh, and just so it's clear, we're not just talking about the colors of the shields and stuff, we're talking about the banners as well. Leif did make that clear. If Saxony becomes an external vassal, they can have their own internal vassals. The way Leif describes it is like giving the territory to another dynasty. In this case, he name drops Brunswick. Now, initially I was slightly disappointed by this. I thought that there would be 3 layers, not 2. But when you consider how a lot of these titles and domains work, I think it actually makes sense. Many of these smaller domains and emblems would be reflective of the ruling family, right? Like depending on the century, Bavaria's heraldry would look like this, or this. And titles would come and go, often going extinct before being reinstated to another family. Offhand, I'd look at stuff like the Earl of Pembroke. Again, I just chose something at random to exemplify this. Point is, I think that's fine enough. Besides, this system already sounds complex. You have to pick and choose here. Oh, by the way, way, check this out. This is something I noticed in the new piece of concept art from the Siege video. Besides all the more obvious things, I think we're also seeing the regional retinue system in action. Leif has said they wanted battles to feel like your realm coming together, and this actually sort of reflects that. Seriously, look at how these units are all color-coded differently. And no, I don't think this is just to distinguish the unit types. First of all, why would that apply to color? Second, that actually doesn't add up. I mean, yeah, these archers are whitish tan and these spearmen are red, but look over here. We see two different melee infantry units and they're both colored differently. So yeah, I think that might be a good mock-up for now. Before we get to the live stream stuff, I just want to bring up my remaining questions regarding the factions. Another question I have, and this is strictly regarding the Holy Roman Empire, is how are you guys going to reflect the civil war that was literally going on at the starting year? Is it going to be similar to like what Warhammer 1 did, where if you played as Karl Franz, your home settlement of Reichland was basically overrun by secessionists and he basically had to stop a civil war before he could get any further? Is it going to be like a more advanced version of that? My next formal question is, what is the minimum size a faction needs to be in order to be considered a candidate for being a playable faction? Can duchies and counties, regardless of whether or not they're their own thing or an external vassal of someone else, be in the running to becoming a separate playable faction if they are unique enough or have the potential to be unique enough? And I also know you don't have a specific idea on what the playable factions are going to be yet, but do you have a rough estimate or number? Not counting internal vassals, of course. And now with that one, I'm sure that it might be too early to even know that yet, but just a shot in the dark, I'm going to put that out there. Also regarding this new vassal system, is this going to be a thing across the whole map, or only as part of the feudal system in Europe? I hope it's the former because this is such a good idea that can work pretty much everywhere. For example, if you saw our recent video on our expanded campaign map, we mentioned that the Ayyubids have several notable vassals, not unlike their European counterparts. Just something to think about. So yeah, as you can see, there's already a lot of developments, but of course we are far from over. We still need to talk about the live stream and all the repercussions of that, as well as the other part of the recap post, because there is also a section here on modding, and suffice to say it's very promising. As a long-time modder of this series, I'm really happy that they're considering mods from the ground up this time. Now, some of this is technically old news, like they mentioned the Warforged suite of tools before, but apparently there's other tools as well? They also said they want the mod browser directly integrated into the game to make access even easier. Now, apparently they're still trying to work out the details, but I love the idea of having this be part of the campaign customization options. That could be very useful. We even got some screenshots. Now, I find it very interesting that this looks so similar to Unreal Engine's interface. And to be clear, that's not a bad thing. Quite the contrary, it feels like the Total War engine is really modernizing. Now, I don't know if this was intended, but there's definitely a level of symbolism here that the first glimpse of the modding tools we're getting features of building. Building modding has always been difficult in Total War, and it's not just Attila. Ask the Warhammer modders, they can also attest to how annoying map and building modding is. So showing these things in particular almost feels like symbolic, by showing how they intend to make what was often one of the hardest things to mod much easier. We also see this in the live stream, since there's a section here where we see a developer drawing walls. That is a godsend, although we still need to see how the AI handles that. As for this remark at the end, I will say this. When you're ready, we'll be waiting. Alright, now let's finally get to the live stream. I watched it live. You might have noticed me chime in the chat a couple times, although to be honest, just like last time, the chat was cancer, so I kept it hidden most of the time. CA Josh's expression here says it all. Seriously, Josh, if you're watching this, you were an absolute trooper. I can only imagine the meltdown that happened in chat when we saw the brief return of pocket ladders here. And to be clear, just want to preempt this now, this is just temporary so they can speed things along and test out certain features. They had to repeat this like several times, so I want to echo that sentiment. But yeah, eventually proper ladders will be making a comeback. And as if we needed more proof that they weren't lying, you can clearly see guys holding ladders in the concept art. That aside, I thought the live stream was really good. We'll go over specifics in a moment, but overall I thought it was very solid. The setup was definitely better, and you can tell they had a better grasp over what they were doing with it. Almost everything they said sounded good. There's just a couple points of concern I have, but we'll get to that. It's also nice to have some new footage and concept art I can use as B-roll for these videos. I'm also very impressed with how well the in-engine demonstration went. Maybe it's because they warned us of potential bugs and issues beforehand, but to be honest, considering what this was, I'm amazed this functioned as well as it did. Especially the fact that units didn't get stuck, even in the tower and keep. There were still some oddities if you look carefully though. Right, there's definitely some flecks of weirdness if you know where to look. Like, these 3 guys got confused apparently, this poor sap was having a seizure for a moment, and clearly, this fabric right here is possessed by Beelzebub. I hope that makes it clear that I'm joking, by the way. Obviously, this is going to be fixed. But seriously, the fact that it's this functional this early is great. We'll see as they add more features to this if it stays that way though. As for specifics, let's go beat by beat. First off, we have the discussion of their vision for battles. For the most part, this is just going over stuff in the cohesion post again, but we do get some interesting tidbits. They confirm that they want battles to be slower by popular demand. The scale of battles is going to be about the same as in previous Total Wars, which is fine, I guess. I understand that. I would love it if we could at least have the option to make them bigger. You're kind of like the laboratory mode for the Warhammer titles. Just a thought. I love the talk of making battles cinematic again, because that's where historical Total War has stagnated a lot. Between the lack of innovation and the jank of the current engine, it really is hard to get that cinematic flair sometimes. There's also an idea they mentioned about having moments of inspiration be able to turn the tide of battle, or at least try to, like snatching victory from the jaws of defeat. There's some historical examples Leif gives regarding this. I'll be honest, he is a little bit nebulous on what this actually would look like, but he described it as kind of like an anti-chain route. I do have some questions and points of concern over this, but I'm gonna hold off on talking about this until we see a version of this in action. Moving on to sieges, they said they want to make them way fewer but more impactful. They want them to feel like a climax of a great war, not just some common thing. Especially in the wake of Warhammer 3, that's a wise choice and a welcome reprieve. They also cited this painting as a point of reference and inspiration, so that's pretty cool. Never heard of this painting until now. Now, I want to take a brief sidestep on the livestream and talk about a post Leif made about sieges weeks ago, since there was a bunch of stuff mentioned here that was not brought up in the livestream. Besides the classic Total War options of assault the settlement or starving out the enemy, they want to explore other options too. Some of these sound like throwbacks to Medieval 2, some of these sound brand new. First of all, Leif mentions the prospect of diplomacy being a way of resolving sieges. He cites the Siege of Brescia by Heinrich VII as a point of reference. They said they want to make sieges feel dynamic and interactive and give more options, like launching night raids or have small assaults on the walls, using spies to poison the wells or open the gates. Some of these sound very similar to Sabotage actions in previous games. This is all well and good. I love the idea of having a more nuanced approach to this stuff, but I'm curious to see how it's going to be executed. If it's just a glorified ancient action or something like that, then to be honest, it's just fluff. If there's something more significant or tangible with it, however, then that could be interesting. Like always, time will tell. Back to the live stream, we see a couple of videos of them putting settlements together. Now, I have no idea if this is the same tool that will be part of the Warforged suite or not, but we do get some interesting stuff here, like the aforementioned wall drawing, for example. I like how this is like a little glimpse of their process here. It's very interesting.
I look forward to the videos that analyze every single click on those boxes of what every single option is.
Yeah.
Hey, you're precisely right, Josh. I don't know if anyone else has done this yet, but here we go. There is actually a lot of interesting stuff in this tab. Not everything is worth mentioning, of course. A lot of these are just for factors like climate, weather, time of day, etc. But we do have some interesting things here. For example, we have separate indicators for settlement density and settlement size. There seem to be 4 different settlement levels and 7 different levels of settlement density. We have 6 different wall levels, and you can see how that changes the size of the walls, which I think might be new. We also see that early castles work a step closer to the Molten and Bailey thing, although I think they're at least wooden here. Either way, it's a nice touch. They said they wanted to feel like there's a progression to settlements over time, which makes sense. I was also slightly confused by the 2 different wall settings for a moment, like what's the difference between wall level and castle wall size? And it turns out wall level is for the settlement and castle wall is for the keep. And oh boy, look how big those walls can get. Now let's get to the juiciest part, the sieges themselves. There's several YouTubers that already covered this, but here's the cliff notes. Multi-layer sieges are making a comeback. It's looking like 3 different layers. Settlements are 360 degrees, so that's good. Walls are going to be fully destructible, so no more weird stubs and indestructible areas. Moats are confirmed. And while we don't see it in the in-engine demonstration, there is an indicator for it here, and we see it in the concept art. Settlements are going to be smaller than the likes of Warhammer 3, though by how much remains to be seen. And yes, they clarified that special settlements like Constantinople are going to be bigger. Apparently, walls will have a separate building chain. Barricades are confirmed, and these look closer to Attila's barricade system, which is good. I like the idea of them being improvised looking, because first of all, that makes it easier for an enemy to breach through it, relatively speaking, and it also just feels more flavorful to be that way. I also like how these barricades are comparatively bigger than in previous titles, so you can have more than one unit involved. I would love to see some cultures like the Italians use Pavi shields as part of the setup, by the way. Please, CA, give me my Pavises. And no, you can't build towers in this manner, so thankfully this is not going to be like Warhammer 3. Speaking of towers, gone are the magical arrow nonsense. Towers are fully garrisonable. They even want melee infantry to be able to pick up bows in this situation if they're in the tower and shoot at enemies. Also, you can fight in the keep, and that definitely ones up Medieval 2. Every stream so far, I swear, has like one moment that genuinely surprises me. The first one had dropping castles and ports anywhere. This one is the fighting in the keep. Even for what this looks awesome, and the pathfinding is surprisingly functional for it. They implied that men would be able to fall off the walls again, just like in Rome 1, although sadly enough we didn't see it here. We also saw a glimpse of a new battle feature called Suppression, which is pretty straightforward, where if a ranged unit fires on another, they could be, well, suppressed and prevented from returning fire properly. It doesn't completely paralyze the unit, but it does seem to cause a lot of problems. If I can make a suggestion, please make sure this isn't too OP, because otherwise it's just going to end up being very cheap or very frustrating, or both. Also, Pavi's crossbowmen should be immune to suppression. Just saying that right now. That is literally the purpose of Pavi shields, to protect the soldier from enemy fire, and that could be an interesting form of counterplay. Now I want to introduce a new segment to these videos. I call it Point of Failure. I will bring up this segment every time there's something more tangible to look at. We spend a lot of time discussing and going over the positives and potentials of these new additions and features. I always say though that a lot of it's going to boil down to the execution. And when it comes to stuff that's more tangible, I want to elaborate on this. The essence of this segment is going to be asking a very simple but an important question. How could this go wrong? What are the potential design problems or points of failure with what the Med Free team has planned? Now before we get into this, I am by no means saying that this is going to be what happens. Hopefully the Med Free team is already aware of these potential issues and they're gonna deal with it. They're not stupid, but I don't see the harm in discussing it and putting it out there. It's also quite appropriate that the first topic for this segment is sieges, a game mode that has always been problematic in Total War. Almost every Total War game has had issues with sieges in some way, and if you say that Rome 1 or Medieval 2 or Shogun 2 are the exception to this, you're lying or you're biased. Even putting those examples aside, I think we can all agree that we don't want a repeat of the mistakes of Warhammer 3's sieges. I hope the Med Free team actually studied what went wrong with Warhammer 3 sieges, because that alone would be very useful for them. Alright, enough of the preamble, let's get into this. The first point of failure is the most obvious, so I'm not going to spend that much time on it. Pathfinding. I think we all know this one already, right? We do, CA does. It's the bane of Total War sieges. Now again, all things considered, what we saw so far looked really solid. Trust me, I was eagle-eyed during this part of the demonstration. The only time I was a little concerned was this part here. Corners, Pathfinding's worst nightmare. Now it's excellent that these guys didn't get stuck, but I did notice they're still being bogged down here. They're really hugging that corner. Look how much space there is here. They should be utilizing that more. But that's my only point of concern, and you might be able to make the argument that I'm nitpicking. Even in places like the tower and the keep, everything was working fine. There's several other potential points of failure that all kind of intermingle with each other. I want to bring up Warhammer 3 sieges again for context. I mean, yeah, I know Fail was better apparently, but Warhammer 3 was the last time CA tried to really innovate sieges, so I feel like it's more relevant. And there is a point to this, just bear with me. Like I said, Warhammer 3 sieges are a great reference point on what not to do. It was a perfect storm of bad ideas and even worse executions that caused it all to end up in a nest of regret. Warhammer 3 settlements were too big, and the garrisons were too small. Everything about pocket ladders that made walls meaningless. The settlements were not well suited for defending since there were too many corridors, stairs, and pathways to the keep. There were very few spots where a defender could actually defend, aside from the city square, and that was usually not good enough. The tower defense system they integrated was also ultimately useless, and the towers that weren't part of that system were also useless. All this ended up in a game mode that was perfectly biased toward the attacker, not the defender. The exact opposite of the intention, because all an attacking force had to do was simply have a bigger army, because the defending units couldn't be everywhere, and defenses were useless several different ways over. I bring all this up because there is surprising potential for a repeat, at least partially. Now to their credit, the Med Free team has already avoided some of the same pitfalls, well with nixing pocket ladders, having the barricades be closer to a tiller system, and the aforementioned stuff with the towers being garrisonable. Yeah, that all certainly helps. The fact that settlements aren't as big is also helpful, but that's not going to be enough on its own. While I love the idea that walls are fully destroyable and that should absolutely be a thing, saying, I'm very concerned with how easy it's going to be to destroy walls in this game. If it's as quick as in previous titles, then I feel that walls might be made meaningless, as just a couple artillery pieces can just evaporate a wall, to the point of being Pocket Ladders 2.0. Yes, I'm that concerned about this. Leif has also said that defending armies are not going to be big as attacking armies.
The intention of these, and again it sort of speaks a little bit to perhaps more the campaign, how sieges tie into campaign. A 20 versus 20, the full stacks against each other, should really not result in a victory for the attacker. There's some challenges around this, but that's our intention, that if you have a siege, you should be able to hold off, don't name it with the cross, but there's maybe 8 to 11 units as a defender, you should hold off like a 20 old school full stack, right?
Now this is perfectly fine in theory, and it's also historically accurate, but this is giving me Warhammer 3 flashbacks once again, with how that game had small garrisons. And we also don't know how many entrance ways to the different layers of the settlement there are. I tried to eyeball it, and there's at least 3 or 4, which might be fine, but that still might be a stretch, and if it's more than 3 or 4, I'm afraid the defending forces will be spread too thin and trying to cover everything. Combine that with walls being too easy to destroy, and can you see why I'm concerned? Yeah, the settlements are smaller, but that won't be enough to compensate. I think there's real potential for a repeat of Warhammer 3's problems, even if on paper it has some differences. Again, I'm not saying this is gonna happen, I'm just saying it's possible, and hopefully if the Med3 team hasn't considered this already, they will now. Now, in order to be constructive with this as well, I want to give some suggestions on how they could avoid these pitfalls. First of all, walls should be mad strong, like strongest ever in Total War. Artillery should still be able to destroy them, but it needs to be way slower than in previous games. That way, there's only so much you can physically destroy. It also gives a great trade-off with siege towers, ladders, and battering rams, where the latter can do it quicker, but it's more dangerous, while the former has a better chance to succeed, but it takes longer. Also, if it takes longer for artillery to destroy the walls, then it makes it easier for defenders to intercept. Another way they can avoid the pitfall is simply make sure there aren't too many pathways to the keep. Make these settlements actually be defensible. For example, I love how this barricade is positioned. It is a very good defensible spot. More of this, please. It's also possible that just having multiple wall layers, as long as there's gates and stuff for each layer, yeah, that could also negate some of my concerns as well. But that should not be the only failsafe. So yeah, those are my main concerns. Overall, I'm still very impressed with what they've shown so far. Now, before we get to our remaining questions, we like to answer creative assemblies. Now, some of these are my opinions and some of these are coming from other mod team members. Regarding the question about the speed and pace of the battles, we agree with the consensus that battles need to be slower. While I personally don't mind the faster pace sometimes, slowing things down would be better. Regarding this question here, for me, 360-degree sieges are very important. It's a no-brainer, and it's silly that this was ever taken down in the first place. And as for multi-pronged attacks, I personally use them all the time. That's all there is to it. Retired mod team member Gearhawk also chimes in here, saying that this is about gameplay variety, and the option needs to be there regardless of how often it's used. And yeah, I second that notion. As for this question here, see my point of failure section, because I think that basically answers this. As for this question, this is again pretty straightforward. Stuff like how the settlements look, the things I built, I expect that stuff to be reflective of what's going on. Settlements in general should feel like they're organic and not just a copied-pasted template, because that was an issue in a lot of Total War games. Now as for these next two questions, I'm just going to read retired mod team member Gearhawk's answers because he sums it up better than I ever could. Regarding this question, they did one thing. Block routes players expected to be open, so they were great flank savers in multiplayer games. In single players, they were cheese walls that confused the AI and created bottlenecks. That's the issue to address this time around. They should remain simple last-minute barricades that aren't hard to break through, but can cause a pain for fast units trying to get an easy flank. It's a next-gen Total War too, so it's time to add variety and depth to them as well, moving on from the set locations for example. A frustrating thing was, again, pathing. Besides that, functionality. In Empire, they were more like dollhouses that didn't serve a real tactical purpose other than looking pretty with your units inside. In Rome 2, they were very present, and the simplicity of how they worked made them a bit of a bore. They were literally just fancy looking wall pieces. This time around, they need to have variety and be functional. Archers sitting in them should be heavily buffed unless stormed by melee. Do away with magical arrow towers and make them garrisonable buildings that make archers within, not on top, nigh immortal, but have the massive trade-off of being crushed if the tower is bombarded by arty, or left behind if the walls fall and they don't retreat in time. As for the last question they ask, to be honest, I respectfully disagree with it. There isn't a singular essential mechanic, but a confluence of multiple factors. The layout of the cities, the defendability of the walls and the keep, the balancing for both sides, the use of siege engines and artillery, all these things are important. If any one thing is lacking, it all falls apart. And that goes double for this question here. The most essential battle mechanic, I'm sorry, but I disagree with the idea of distilling it to be one thing. Especially with land battles, it is a combination of factors. It's having an army of thousands of soldiers, all depicted with good or at least decent 3D graphics, using real-life tactics like formations and using the terrain. The animations is a big one. Seriously, the animations being realistic looking and stuff, combined that with the scale, that is a huge part of what makes Total War special and unique right there. The idea of what you're doing on the battle map reflects stuff in the campaign as you conquer the world. It's all these things together. But that's not a singular mechanic, is it? It's just the nature of what Total War is. I know this is probably not what you were looking for, but that's just how I feel about it. So now comes our questions. First of all, will battering rams and siege towers be used to pull upon multiple layers of walls, or will they just auto-destroy or be stuck in like in Warhammer? I really hope it's the former. Will siege towers have dedicated ramps? Will there be sappers or tunnelers? This next question is ultimately a minor point, but where did the placeholder assets even come from? Were these cobbled together from other titles or did someone make them? I'm particularly curious about these animations. Are these holdovers from Troy or Pharaoh? So, yeah, I think we will leave it there. This was a long one, so it's gonna be a bit before I make another one of these. I'm thinking probably the latter half of April, and it's probably gonna be a lot shorter, unless we get some unexpected bombshells or something. Or if we get that roster thread. Also, sorry this took so long, things have been very busy on my end. Expect more news on the anniversary update soon, but for now, I will see you guys later.